What is up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the Sunday Slaughter podcast.
What's happening, everybody?
It's just me and Weasel. There's plenty of people that are within the Sunday Slaughter crew that are playing their matches right now for the Slaughterhouse tournament. So it's just the two of us, but that's okay because I have plenty to talk about. I'm very excited to talk about neutrals. But before we get into the visions that came out, I want to get some introductions out of the way. First off, if you haven't seen the latest episode of the Sunday Slaughter Battle Report, it's episode 2 of season 3. I went up against Tony and his beautiful Baratheon army. If you guys haven't checked that out, go to my YouTube. And the Slaughterhouse tournament kicked off this week. So, Charles, you actually played your match already. It was the inaugural match. Let us know how that went. Who'd you play against and what armies you brought?
Yes, I played against the illustrious Lord Commander Bob. It was pretty cool that we got paired up first round, first match. So we dove in pretty quick to get the first stream going because we felt appropriate that community members would be the first to do the game for the event. And he brought our Night's Watch list that Griffin's put in there, which uses the Infantry Hunter Rangers, I believe is what it is, for Night's Watch.
Yes.
And Alistair, which is just gross. But it really kind of embodied what we wanted our list to be, which was really cool list. You wish you could play more in tournaments, but they're just like units are just a little too expensive, or they don't quite get work done because of Walder or something like that. So we knew the list was going to be really powerful and really tempting to play. And really hard to beat in week 1, but we really wanted it to be out there for people to play and get to play with those fun units. And as I expected, I got wrecked by the output, the action economy of those units.
You played as Greyjoys. I saw in your chat that you had some initial thoughts on your first experience with them. You want to share those?
Yeah, so as covered by a lot of other people, outside of Victorian, they don't have a ton of action economy other than some free attacks, right? So he adds secondary free attack, free charge type actions in there, and there's a native free attack in the deck. But they don't have a whole lot of mobility options. In my experience, when I played them, the Iron Makers, while underperformed because the way I played them, I only had 1 unit, I do think are the highest potential unit because of crit blow, they get to a 2-up save, they hit on 3s, and they're a fairly affordable unit at their point cost. Archers at 4 are worth it. They were fine. But the ability to have, your pillage ability turned off really hurt me in the Alistair matchup for 1.6, which we know you will see a little bit and still in 2021 with like Stannis' card that was spoiled. We know you'll have it in Lannisters, and we know you'll have it with Zorses and stuff in some cases. So I'd be leery with Iron Makers and the new Zorses and stuff. But overall, they felt interesting. But I have some pretty pointed opinions, I guess, on that. It felt like their tactics deck didn't ever want to do anything. The triggers were fairly friendly. Almost half of it's on activation and stuff, which you have all your activations. But they didn't really go anywhere. A lot of their cards pinned on secondary checks, right? So it's like start of an activation, but first thing you have to resolve is a morale test, and if you fail, the card doesn't do anything. It's not like if you fail, you get one thing. If you pass, you get another thing. It's just dead. You didn't do anything. So it seems cool that you get a way to like chain some of those things, but they don't really work well. Like they're cool, but they don't really go anywhere. So I'm really interested to see what the other commanders are going to do, but their deck actually felt a little aimless because even like outside of like that card, the exact situation is like Raider Cry or something like that. The other cards involve other conditions like Finger Dance is a double-edged sword. If you get popped by a bad panic test or two, then suddenly you're one who's vulnerable whenever you get attacked, and that's a problem. Or the tactics board. Well, if nobody's taking the tactics board, or depending on when you play and how you play it, you don't have a whole lot of value there. So it's really, really odd when you want to play cards, and you're still not guaranteed to get any mileage out of them. So their deck was really frustrating for me to play, honestly. Not even just from a 1.6 standpoint, but from just like I have this deck in my hand. What does it want to do? I saw a ton of cards. I was pitching cards. I was cycling with Roderick. I saw a ton of cards. None of them did much of anything. They just didn't.
Well, here's the thing. Early on in the match, I noticed that you started to get the healing engine going a little bit. Well, you literally brought a unit back from the dead. And then I thought you were going to stabilize. Tasha's cards, they deal with healing wounds and a buff to morale. But, I was telling other people that were watching the match that I thought you were going to have a hard time dealing with how many dice double Ranger Hunters were going to push out throughout the whole game. And it definitely ended up that way.
Yeah, and I will say that too. So Aaron Greyjoy, if you guys follow me into the various discords, and I've commented on things like that in the past, that I didn't feel like he was very impressive at 4 points, but I did see his advantage, right? And that is a good point, and it's leading to what we're going to talk about today with neutrals. So using him to take a zone that grants an action is automatic heal whenever you attach him, basically, right? So you're gonna go put him on the tactics board, and for players who don't know that, you get to choose the order of resolving an influence or the zone and which order. So you get to influence first, and then use horse for a maneuver or march or retreat, or swords for an attack, for instance. So what I was doing was I was pretty regularly able to either take a sword or horses to get that one heal, and then on their turn they would then take their other heal, right? So I was guaranteed roughly 2 points of wounds returned from him every round that I did it that way. But that required me to play the tactics board very specifically, where, for instance, I could have just took bags and healed 3. But that, coupled with getting bags and other things, matters. So it was more impressive than I thought he was. It'll be really interesting to see him with some units like cavalry units. I think if you ran Flayed Men or Horses or something in neutrals, and you put him on there, that's a good bit of wounds back. You can actually pretty reliably get to that second rank back in cavalry. I think that might make a big difference, right? You might play him in that regard.
Right.
Fast Girls getting a potential of, in some cases, getting 2 wounds back on average, 3 with a zone. If you get denied bags, for instance, they're trying to stop you from healing, right, and healing them back up, it gives you that avenue. So basically, where I didn't think he was going to really have a home, I found one. Like, I do think he found one in that game. I was undervaluing him some. Is he great? No. Is he pretty good though in certain lists? Yeah, I think he'll see play for a while until you get more NCUs.
Enough about Greyjoys. We will save that for another episode. I want to get right into the visions of the flames that came out regarding neutrals. I'm just going to go ahead and admit that neutrals and Boltons in particular were like my first love. And I started with them. I played with them for a couple months. My first 2 tournaments, I played all Boltons. And then I wanted to get better as a player, so that meant experimenting with other armies. So, if you regard Boltons as my first love, then my next faction, Night's Watch, was like the goth chick that I was always attracted to and thought it would be fun to date. And then, after a few dates, I guess, she realized that she didn't have much depth. So I think the next faction I tried out was Lannisters, was sort of like that nerdy girl that you found out was just too smart for your own good. I think Starks was the next one. I think Starks was sort of like the hot girl that you were super psyched to be dating, and then you realize like she's been with everyone. And then I experimented with Targs a little bit. I guess I would see Targs as like the unattractive girl that suddenly got hot, and then Baratheons were like the very cute girl, but then you realize that she had way too many issues. And then currently Free Folk, and I'm enjoying Free Folk a lot. Don't get me wrong; they have allowed me to make it to the next round of the World Cup. But then these Bolton spoilers came out, and then I'm like, all right, I think it's time to go back to my first true love. Let's just start out with the 1.6 deck and just do a look back on the neutral identity and what that means for 1.7. So, Charles, did you experiment with neutrals at all? Are you familiar with their deck?
Yeah, I've played him a fair bit. We had a couple. Some of my friends who were Baratheon players actually at the shop. They played neutrals for a while until their Baratheon stuff came in. So I got to get experience with it, and then I've matched up with it a few times in TTS. I thought about dabbling with it a little bit, but I'd much rather just kind of run the neutral commanders and like weirder other factions. I'm actually a big fan of old Ramsay.
Yes, yes. That I was actually gonna say that Ramsay was my favorite commander of the two Bolton commanders. But one thing that I learned when starting out with neutrals is it attracted me that they were a toolbox, a deck that was sort of jack of all trades but master of none. And when you start experimenting with other factions, you realize when you make a deck that is trying to be good at everything, you can't really have those game-changing cards that other factions have, like a sudden charge or swift advance or a counterplot. The most powerful cards that I saw were surprise strategy and cunning scheme, I think was the name of the card, where you can disrupt uh, plays from your opponent, but it's a very tricky deck if you want to play well with them in a competitive setting. But thematically, I mean, they were right up my alley. So I'm happy to see some changes, but let's sort of digest what 1.7 looks like together here. So we'll go over the first card. It's called Tactical Approach, which now that I think about it, it seems weird that they have another card that's Tactical Approach, but does something different. That's a Stannis card, right? Or was that in their
That's the
basic deck?
Stannis card.
Okay, that's a bit weird. But anyway, all right, Tactical Approach. When a unit is performing a melee attack before rolling dice, choose one. This attack deals +1 hit. After rolling a defense dice, the defender blocks +1 hit. Control the letters, or if your commander's unit is the attacker/defender, deal or block +1 hit. Okay, this sort of seems like the adjusted version of Wealth and Cunning. Those of you who have played neutrals will remember that Wealth and Cunning is if you're the attacker, deal D3 hits, and if you have the letters, it's automatic 3. And then if you're the defender, block D3 hits, or if you have the bags, it's an automatic 3. So it seems like they toned it down a little bit. I mean, what do you think about this card? I'm sort of meh on it. I mean, it's not game changing.
Yeah, so part of this is the trying to get rid of surprise one die checks, right? So like running into a Shields of the Relevant Men, or a like you said, a Wealth and Cunning or a Wealth of the Rock, and just being like, oh, surprise, I blocked D3 hits out of the 5 you did for me. And then it's variance, right? And then they roll a 1. So like you're like, oh man, I can't account for if they have that card or not. If it's 1 through 3, neither person can account for it. This is much more linear, right? So if I know I'm playing neutrals, I know I'm looking, they have tactical approach. I go, okay. I go in there, they can block 1 hit. And I look, oh, do they have letters? Okay, they can block 2 hits. So I'm looking at my attacks -2, right? Um, so I do think they're trying to make it to where it's a little bit easier for players to keep track of the deck and the deck's output by getting rid of that variance. I still just don't know if maybe this is a little too throttled because, like, now on average it's 1. Um, because letters is still the most fought after zone in the game.
Right,
So
right.
it's 1. It's 1 most of the time. The attack deals 1 hit to 2 hits is actually spicier in some cases. Because when we get a little bit further down, we're going to talk about Bachelor Girls and their output.
Yeah.
So this is flexible that it's both ways, that it's offense and defense. So it is a flexible card, and I do think it's going to be a card that like neutral players will be not discarding; they'll be playing, right? Because it's very flexible. You play it every time, so it's consistent value out of the deck. So like that automatically makes it a B plus card by its very nature. I don't think it's going to have what it takes to get into the A minus category for me, but by default, because it's consistent value that you can just play on whatever turn you drew it to get to more cards that are more potent, it's going to keep it at a B plus for me.
Okay. Moving on to the next card, Adaptive Methods. It says start of any turn, replace 1 condition token on any 1 unit with any other condition token. If you have the letters, you may move 1 condition token from one unit to any other unit. Similar flavor from the original adaptive methods, but one big takeaway that I see is it's start of any turn instead of any time. The original card, you could play it at any time. It's very, I mean, I'd give it a B. When you have it and you need it, it's great.
It's less flexible in one way and more flexible in another, right? So like it's also in that B category for me. So that one was anytime expend one condition token from an enemy unit as if it were any condition token. So often, offensively, you can turn things into vulnerables and the panics and vice versa. Or if you got plenty of wounds and you had vulnerable and you don't feel like you needed to worry about the vulnerable, you can just move it over into a panic, right, and get even more damage out. And then if you controlled letters, you may also move one condition token from any unit to another unit. So you could you can convert one and then move one, which was cool. Now it is now it's on any unit. So now you can actually replace one condition token on any with another condition token. So you can actually swap on your own units now. So it's a
Right.
defensive card if you needed to, though an oddball one. Um, but it's not that problematic, right? Like if somebody's got a panic token or a vulnerable token on a key unit, you can just move it into a weakened if you don't care about attacking with that unit, right? If it's just I need to hold this objective, I need to just not die, you can swap it. If you control letters, you may move a condition token from one unit to another unit. So basically, you can purge a unit off of yourself onto another unit. So it's a little more flexible that it covers your units. Oddly enough, you've got tactical approach, which is not the same as the Baratheon card, but shares a name with it. And then you got adaptive methods, which is very much in line with the way the Baratheon cards work. So you got kind of
Right.
two back-to-back cards in the same design space.
It,
I give this one a B minus to a C plus. Actually, probably more of a C plus in my opinion because it's solid because we're seeing an increase in token play out of the spoilers. So it's going to be relevant that it's any unit, but it's not often going to be impactful enough because there's going to be so much redundancy in how they put tokens out.
and another thing to note is we're jumping a little bit ahead here before we get to the rest of the deck, but tactical approach powered up by the letters, adaptive methods powered up by the letters. One big difference that I see compared to 1.6 is there are no longer cards that are powered up by the money bags, which
Yeah.
is very strange to me when you're dealing with neutrals and their whole theme is mercenaries, yet there's no incentive to take the money bags, especially when you have units like Stormcrows.
Stormcrows. Yeah.
Very, very interesting.
It is weird because also we've seen or people have speculated a pattern of trying to devalue horses and swords and letters as the three most popular zones. But as we've discussed, or I've discussed with Carlo and some other people in a couple other spaces and discords and things like that, one of the most popular and powerful zones on the board is bags. It's fought over as much as letters most rounds. In some cases, more than horses. Right? It's often in the big three category. You can almost for some rounds and some matchups, horses are that valuable, but in others, it's bags. When you're
Definitely in the
playing
later rounds like three
3 and
through
4,
six.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
and depending on the matchup, like you said, like for as early as round 2 against things like Night's Watch and Lannisters, because of their defensive cards, right? You just end
yeah.
up with this situation where it's really, really important. So it's odd that we thought we saw a pattern, right? People speculated that they were going to be devaluing those zones or adjusting the tactics board in some way. But honestly, this super leans into letters, as you mentioned, and that is one of the reasons why I had to mark this deck down a little bit because it's real easy to turn off all these cards because I like to take one zone.
Well, let's move on to the next card. Now, this card, I kind of wanted to save it for last, but we're just going in order.
Yeah.
And okay, it's going back to my issues with the original neutrals deck, and there was no card in there when you're playing against a neutral that you're absolutely scared of. When we're talking about the basic deck. Now, issue commands is something that I think is an A plus card. And Charles, we'll get to your thoughts on it, but I'll go ahead and read it off. So, issue command says when your commander's unit activates, instead of this unit performing an action this turn, Target one other friendly unit in long range. It performs one attack or charge action. And then there's the alternate secondary thing that you can do with the card. And it says start of any turn, target one friendly combat unit, remove one order token from that unit, and they may use that order again this round. I think this card is a must keep in your hand if you draw it. Just the first part of it. And I'm already thinking about ways that we can break this card. And I think you've already just discovered a few of them that we've talked about in Discord, Charles. So let's start first off. What do you think about this card? And then we can go over some of the uses that people may see.
Yeah, so this is, in my opinion, as well, one of the, if not the defining card in this deck. It is definitely the combo card with the units and the actions. And also a big shout to all the people who keep saying that they're toning down tactics decks and they're cutting down free attacks and they're cutting down charges. Because here is yet another card we see that is a free attack or charge action. It's in a core deck. It's not commander specific. And as we read later on, it's recyclable. So there's a lot of free economy in this card, a ton of free action economy. This is a very scary card for a lot of people.
Right off the bat, I'm thinking, of course, they said they're going to be trying to cut down on free actions, but this does have a caveat, and it surrounds your commander's unit. So obviously, if you lose your commander, that first part of the card is completely useless. But the second part of the card, first thing that comes to mind is Bachelor Girls. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, as it should be. Bachelor Girls are probably the iconic unit after the Flayed Men nerf, other than Cutthroats for neutrals. As far as like splashy plays and getting a lot of work done. And this is obviously fantastic for them. And that's why it's one of the excited a scary card is that it's going to do things in the list you're going to build with neutrals because of what it's trying to do. And as we mentioned, if you don't have your commander, you get the secondary out. Then later we get the surprise strategy. You'll realize you can get it back. So you'll get a lot of functionality out of this physical card. If you see one, you'll get work out of it every time.
I also see this card possibly dictating the first turn plays in some rounds where if you can set up a nasty dervishes charge in someone's flank, activate your commander's unit, play this card, have them charge in. Now, this is 1.6 dervishes, but they get the 2 tokens and then retreat. And now they have to make the choice whether or not to turn and face for their next activation or leave another flank open for another unit to charge in. So I'm excited for this card.
Yeah, and also another game where it's worth considering in is Fire and Blood. It's going to make for interesting plays because it's an early commander activation. So at the beginning of your activation, you can then mark a unit with your commander.
Right.
And then sacrifice their action to play this card to charge in with a more powerful unit. That's a more full health or something like that. It's a more threatening unit. Get the flank charge, kill the marked unit, right? You can finish them off with something else that still doesn't put your commander in threat. So your commander can do a little more while being at the max 12 inches away to do those types of interactions. So it's just a very flexible card, and one of the reasons why I do think it's going to become the staple for dedicated neutrals players.
All right. So that was issue commands. Let's move on to the next card, Worth the Risk. When a friendly unit is performing a morale test, after rolling dice, that unit may reroll any dice for this test. If that unit is in short range of your commander, it passes this test instead. So this is going back to what they said in the article that a lot of the deck is going to be focused around your commander's unit. This is very much like the 1.6 version Worth the Reward. A little differences here. So Worth the Reward said that if you had the money bags, you would automatically pass the test. Otherwise, you had to reroll all the dice. So there's a little bit more versatility here. I don't know if there's much to say about this card. Charles, what do you think?
Nope, it's the same as it was before. As we mentioned, it's kind of odd they backed away from the bags on the tactics board being relevant to your cards. But they did replace it with your commander, which is one of the things they said they were going to do. So this one checks out. It's a solid B minus card, C plus card. Panic is still very relevant in this situation, and in some matchups like Lannisters, because of Lannister Guardsmen, it's going to get bumped up to a B plus to an A minus card. You'll be really glad to see this in your hand. I think it checks out in a lot of matchups, so it's still as good as it was before.
All right. So next we have meticulous planning. And again, I'm very confused by the naming conventions and mainly because this is a card that you see in Free Folk right now in 1.6. It's a Mance card. But then when we get to the next card, Surprise Strategy, it's essentially meticulous planning, but they switched around the names. But all right, I'll read off the card here. Meticulous planning. At the end of the round, search your tactics deck for one commander tactics card and add it to your hand and shuffle your deck. The other thing you can do with it is start of any turn. If you control the letters, search your tactics deck for one commander tactics card, add it to your hand, then shuffle your deck. Now, it's going to be hard for me to really grade this card just because we've only seen one commander spoiled so far regarding their cards. But when you can thin your deck, you're searching your deck, that's always a powerful effect. Especially if we start seeing some start of round triggers, such as like a force march or something like that. It can be very powerful. You know, as a free folk player, Charles, you're familiar with meticulous planning, even though this isn't the effect that Mance has. But what do you think about this one?
I appreciate that they've balanced some of these tutors around commander cards, but they are going to be, by their nature, limited to commanders. I agree with you. It's hard to judge it. I don't super. It's a B plus card. There's always commander cards. They should always be at least pseudo playable. At a minimum, you can play it end round, go get a commander card, and then just discard it if you just really want to thin the deck out aggressively. You can get real jank with it, but this card's value is entirely to be based on the commander you're playing. So solid enough card. It'll be great when you have it when you're playing commanders whose strategies rely on their cards. It's going to add consistency to those builds. So it's good future proofing for neutral builds. So I mean, I'm here for it in that regard.
Yeah, and again, tutoring, it's great. But thinning your deck, also good. So yeah. Moving on to surprise strategy. Start of a friendly turn. Discard this card and one other card to return one card from your discard pile to your hand. If you control the letters, you only have to discard this card. Now, I take back what I said about Mance's version of meticulous planning because you're actually searching your deck for that card. This one is bringing back a card, so it's recursion. Yeah, I mean, issue commands. I feel like
this card gets kind of crazy, right? Because depending on the power of your commander cards, once you're getting them out with meticulous planning, you're playing 2 more copies of them effectively, right? So
right.
you can tutor both of them out this way. So you can see 4 copies of a commander card, which everybody who played through Fire Made Flesh knows what that really means. Or even Starks with Sansa, right? Once per game, getting a card back was huge with the right card. So I'm thinking in terms of Sansa's, right? If you had to pay 3 points, this is included in the deck. You could do it anytime, which was cool, but friendly turns almost as flexible, to be honest, as far as how the game's actually played. And it's still any card in your discard pile. So that's a big deal, and you get 2 copies of this. So essentially, you're playing anywhere from at least 2 copies of your favorite card to 4 copies, which is huge. And you alluded to my comments about issue commands. It is possible with 1 Bachelor Girls activation, 1 Commander activation, and 1 NCU activation to or 2 NCU activations technically, and a grip of cards, 5 cards, in some cases 3 if you do 3 NCU. I live the dream to get 6 attacks out of Bastard Girls because you can juggle issue commands and surprise strategy with surprise strategy. So you start off with a swords on Bastard Girls with an NCU or letters, whatever. So you hold letters, doesn't matter. And then so you take the shot, you use the order, so you charge in. It's 2 attacks. And then on your opponent's turn, with the start of any turn, you remove the order. And then at the beginning of your turn, you return issue commands. And basically, you follow that pattern of juggling, using issue commands on their turn to do stuff, right? So like then the Bachelor Girls to actually use their activation. they shoot and charge again if they killed the unit. Let's assume you've got like it's turn 4, right, and you've like half killed a bunch of units. Not super unlikely. Okay, and then you come in from the flank with some Bachelor Girls. You can literally Pac-Man down the entire line, because of the damage. Because then the Bachelor Girls go 2 attacks again. The order's back on them. At which point you play either a second surprise strategy, or a second issue commands, and then you just continue the cycle. You remove the thing again, and then you just keep going. You sack your commander's action, and you go on the line. I've posted in a couple Discords. If you guys come over here and you hit some of the patron chats, I'll post it again. It's kind of long to explain turn for turn, but effectively, you can spend 4 activations, because it's 2 NCUs basically, or 1 NCU, legit 1 NCU minimum, and 2 unit activations is the minimum, and it costs you 5 cards to do it that way. Because basically you need either 2 issue commands or 2 surprise strategies. But so for 3 activations and 5 cards, or 4 or 5 activations and 3 cards, you can get 6 Bastard Girl shots and just Pac-Man down the board. To show you some of the power of surprise strategy. Cycling your best card can have a really high output, is basically what I'm getting at.
All right, so moving on to Spoils of War. We have, okay, first of all, Spoils of War. This was a pretty good card in 1.6. It was always good to combo this after you kill a dog with Walder and then heal up your almost dead cutthroat unit or something like that. It was always nice when it really popped off like that. But now we see a different iteration of the card. They completely changed it. And correct me if I'm wrong, Charles, but is this the same exact card that is in the Baratheon deck?
I don't know if it's the exact same. I actually have it pulled up. Let me look.
All right, so I'll read it while Charles is pulling it up right now. So, start of a friendly turn. Attach this card to a friendly cav or infantry unit until the end of the game. While attached, each time an enemy within short range is destroyed, place 1 order token on this card. This unit's melee attack gained the following based on the number of order tokens, and the effects are cumulative. So it's +1 order token. Before rolling attack dice, the defender becomes vulnerable. If it has 2, it gets +1 to hit. I mean, I like the trigger, like the Baratheon card. You could play it on a friendly turn. You don't have to wait until a unit dies. You don't really feel bad for drawing this in your opening hand. You can just play it. It fills that part of the spectrum where, you have a card that's sort of helping you in grindier type matches. I think it's cool. I would have liked to see a little bit more creativity, not really seeing, a similar effect. If it could be the same card. We'll wait on Charles to confirm this, but I just would have liked to see a little bit more creativity when it comes to the neutral deck.
It is a little different. So Oath of Duty is the on death. Put an order token on a card for Baratheons, and that one only requires 1 order token, and they straight up just get -1 wound to failed panic tests. And if you control the crowns, whenever they perform a melee attack, they get to put a token out. So it's very similar in that it puts a vulnerable token out, which is very likely you choose to do Baratheons. But this one scales. This one has 2 and puts +1 to hit. Now, something that is worth noting for all you speculation season folks out there, this neutral card specifically points out attach this card to cavalry or infantry unit until end of game.
Yeah, right.
So non-solos right? So non-solos basically, not non-solos, but monstrous or monsters or war machines, because there are solos that are cavalry models, right? We see that in Jorah and the Mountain That Rides. They have the cavalry symbol, therefore they are cavalry cards models. But the Baratheons is literally any combat unit. So this is slightly limited for, I guess, specific reasons. So for those of you who like to speculate what you might get out of neutrals, who really knows? Because there's a reason apparently to regulate cards to cavalry and infantry. But this one scales, and some we'll probably get into next week is the Targaryen spoilers that came out today. They also have a scaling card, so this is actually much closer to the Targaryen card, which I believe is Blood of the Dragon as their scaling card now.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting that they specifically call out, cavalry infantry. I've always thought it would be cool if neutral's got some kind of war machine called the meat grinder. I don't know what it would be. It probably doesn't even need to
Uh,
do anything, just look cool. I'd spend like,
it,
7 to 8 points just to put it out there.
so in War Machine and Hordes, the Minions faction has like these Roadhogs faction. They're like just big anthropomorphic boars. They have a bunch of like steampunk machinery, and they have what's called a thresher. Everybody called it the meat thresher, but basically that's what it was. It was this big, like spiked, cartoony, like grinding wheel car, like hot rod, and it just mulched things it ran into. And that's what I think of every time you say that. And it's perfect, the perfect model for it. If you want a fun model to paint, look up, just look up Minions battle engines as a search term for War Machine and Hordes, and it'll come up. I promise.
See, that's what I'm talking about. I want something like that. I want like a literal like grinding device. So when I kill like an enemy like unit, I'm able to like drop it in there and just like crush it into dust. I feel like that would be pretty sweet. Simon, call me. I've got more ideas. All right, so that is the neutral basic deck. I feel like what better time to move on to the spoiled commander. So we're looking at Ramsay's 3 cards here. And I just want to take a moment of silence here for Cruel Methods, because that literally was my favorite card in the game. No longer is it a start of round free attack. We now see start of any turn, target 1 enemy combat unit. You may expend 1 panic token from that unit. If you do, choose 2. Our options are 1 House Bolton unit in long range restores 2 wounds, and that may be selected multiple times. Second option is that enemy becomes vulnerable. And then the third is that enemy becomes weakened. So right off the bat, we're seeing a versatile card. We're also noting that if you choose vulnerable and weaken, it has to be the same unit. And we have the option of spending the panic token to heal 4 wounds, which is always nice if you need to boost up a rank. But it's almost like a slap in the face that they are calling this card Cruel Methods, just because the name of the card and the 1.6 effect was something to be feared. Even though they knew it was in my deck, it always seemed like they didn't expect it. It was definitely game changing. We see a toned down version of the card. It's totally different. Charles, what do you think?
I think some of what you're going to lose here, you gained in issue commands. So once you start playing it, it won't feel as bad. But at the same time, as a Ramsay player, if you enjoyed playing the Ramsay commander, it's going to feel less unique now because this is a pretty bland card. I don't actually like this card in that Ramsay doesn't come into play really with much that really puts panic tokens out. The deck itself doesn't really put tokens out. So to have a commander regulated to token mechanic that doesn't actually really generate much of his own tokens, like Stannis is regulated to token mechanic. Stannis dumps out tokens. Everything about Stannis is token oriented. He is an engine. Ramsay is not an engine in this case for tokens. So like you almost have to play the new Roos NCU to really consistently get them from what we've seen spoiled so far.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes me not like this card much at all, honestly. Because it basically just says start of any turn, pick one. 80% of the time. 90% of the time. And that's a problem.
Yeah, yeah. I'm still mourning the loss of the original card, but I get it. I try to have faith in the designers and the grand plan for what they're going for in this next iteration of the game. But we'll see. I've yet to try any of these cards, any of these new units. Although I am excited to, but that's not going to stop me from being sad that we lost my favorite card. Okay, moving on to Sadistic Games. Again, another very thematic card that really captured the essence of Ramsay as a character. But you will see when I read off this card that it's definitely a step down from the 1.6 version. So what we have here is start of an enemy turn. Your opponent chooses 1, and then you select targets only after they choose. So we have target up to 2 enemy combat units, they become panicked. Or target 1 engaged enemy, it suffers 2 hits, and +1 hit for each remaining rank in all House Bolton units it is engaged with. So, sadistic games, he's Ramsay is essentially giving you two choices. Pick the lesser of the two evils. The first part of the card, target up to 2 enemy combat units, they become panicked. That has not changed. But the second part of the card, I feel like, it reminds me of the freefold cards that take some setup in order for it to really make an effect on the game. Charles, can you remember what those two cards are?
Yeah, you're talking about There's Too Many and Group Assault are two of the biggest ones. Distraction Tactics. Diversion Tactics is the Thomas card. Distraction
Yeah,
Tactics is a
distraction
minus
tactic.
to hit.
Right. Back in 1.6, when you play sadistic games, uh, it was a hard choice. You would see your opponent really sit there and think about, oh, do I want to take the hits and potentially kill off my dog? Or do I want to take the panic and then be prepared for this onslaught of dice after he plays? What's that Ramsay card?
Our blades are sharp.
That was the combo there. You gave them the choice, and then they had to suffer the consequences. Whereas here, I'm seeing them taking that second option 99% of the time. What do you think?
Yeah, the hits are about the same. It's going to depend on the unit. But yeah, I think in a lot of cases, people have already realized that taking hits that don't generate panic tests is better than failing panic tests in most cases. Because, at max, you take 5 here, 5 hits, you save 2 or 3. It's the same as failing a panic and taking 2. But if you save them all, right, you can reduce the panic. So it's really going to come down to the unit. The problem is that it comes down to that, right? Your opponent gets to look at their unit and understand which result is better for them. So, like, you're attacking into Wardens or Lannister Guardsmen, they're going to take the hits and save on 3s. They're going to let it ride. Things like that, right? Some units are going to rather do that because they know, at most one gets through, not a big deal. So this still mostly happens on their terms, which is why I don't care for it either.
Right.
It more or less did before, but I also didn't love it then either because of that same reason. But yeah.
Well, let's go ahead and read off the new version of Our Blades Are Sharp. So it says, when a friendly unit is performing a melee attack before rolling attack dice, if the defender is panicked, this attack gains precision. If the defender is panicked and the attacker is a House Bolton unit, this attack may reroll any attack dice. Okay, first off, Charles, I'm confused on why they worded it this way. Why couldn't they say when a friendly unit is attacking a panicked unit? Am I missing something here? Does it seem like it was the way that it's worded is kind of weird?
So it is a little weird. So let's look at it. When a friendly unit is performing a melee attack before rolling attack dice. Okay. So there is a window here. If it was whenever they were doing attacked or attacking a unit, technically you'd have to play the card. It's basically when other card windows would trigger, right, or other order windows would trigger. So at this point, if you have an on attack that is worded as on attack that could trigger the token for you, a little bit earlier than the before rolling attack dice window, technically there can be a step in there where you might be able to on there and then have the card resolve. It's really clunky because there's not really a window in there, but we already know that there's sometimes in between steps, like on completing a charge, and things like that where there might be issues. The other thing is that you can play this card. Your card goes in the stack, you resolve it, and then your opponent removes the token in some way or spins it in some way. So, like, because you've got windows like anytimes and stuff, you
Sure.
can manipulate this. This is to account for those weird anytime windows, basically.
It seems like the designers really like the precision keyword. I've been seeing this keyword pop up a lot in the spoilers we've seen so far. It's triggered off of panic tokens, of course. That's thematic within, the Ramsay playstyle. The pseudo charge with the rerolls. Getting rerolls when you're engaged is always great.
I think the rerolls thing is the big takeaway here because we know the new hindering terrain is an auto disorderly, um, which at the same time is weird because um, so you're gonna not have good charges, and auto disorderly means you can't play this card. But what that means is once you get stuck in because you didn't blow something up on the charge, you have a chance to reroll as if you charge later, which is awkward. But that is seems to be a tempo shift they are designing for. I'm not going to say it's what they want, but they are designing in accordance with that, which I'm grateful they had the foresight to be like, okay, way more disorderly charges. Let's give people chances to pick up the tempo if they're grinding it out and they're already engaged, right? So I
Right.
respect that. Again, you see a House Bolton limitation, which is part of the flavor they were going for of like your commander matters, so the types of units you take. So I'll let that slide. But I will say this: I straight up don't care about the precision. Um, as you mentioned, it's because you're getting sixes, but as I mentioned, you're getting rerolls less consistently. um, in this case, possibly not because you're not might be targeting a unit, a Bolton unit in the combat. But also because Jack and Hagar, new NCU, is precision on a stick. His influence is influence a unit, give them precision, regardless of keyword type. Or copy another NCU, which might give you a better bonus, but you get to decide that every time you deploy his attach his influence. So you already have precision on a stick in neutrals. You don't necessarily need a commander card, such a valuable slot, one of 6, one of 3, honestly, to just get you precision. Sometimes it's pretty meh when you look at the overall cards that have been spoiled.
Yeah, I see your argument there. How many NCUs have been spoiled for us so far? We have Roos, we have Joknakar, we have Walder.
Ferris.
We get to Walder and Varys. So that's 4 options we have to choose from.
So like right now you can test this, right? With Roos, Varys, who we know is very good. Roos gives you panic tokens, which at least turns on cruel methods and also turns off Eye Blades of Sharp, which is good. Um, but actually kind of works against sadistic games because they can just later in the game when they're low on units, they can just pick that and you can't put the panic tokens because they're already there.
Right.
Um,
Right.
which makes sadistic games even sadder. But then you take Jack and Hagar and you have precision on stick. So, um, so if you go with that NCU package, it's really not bad. Um, I mean, this card still just does less work at that point.
That's his 3 cards. Ramsay. I'm gonna miss the old version. I'm gonna say it right now. But again, excited to try new things. I'm gonna shout out Carl from West Coast Bannerman because he brought something up that I didn't notice at first, but it's sort of bothering me a little bit. And this is related to the most recent visions that dropped today. It is focused on the Targaryen faction, and we noticed a particular design choice they made within those commanders that sets them apart from other factions. And that is every Targaryen commander gets 4 different cards, and you can replace any one other card in the basic deck with that extra commander card. And Carl said that should have been a neutral thing.
I think it's funny, and not like in a haha kind of way, but like in a peculiar kind of way, because um, so they mention constantly in describing Targaryens as a collection of um, commanders and groups that are unifying under the Targaryen banner, but from a bunch of different walks of life and with all independent motivations, which I agree with from a fluff standpoint. That is true of Targaryens, which is why there's a lot of neutrals involved in Targaryens. But if you tell me that that is the theme and dynamic of that entire faction, I have a hard time not assigning the same theme to the entire band of mercenaries as a faction. And yeah, as Chad's pointing out, the 4th commander card calls out specifically what you pull out, like
Yeah, that was my
Davos and
mistake.
Baratheons for Flea Bottom
Right.
Trick. It
Yeah.
calls out a specific card, so it flip flops. I am also surprised that you don't at least see some of that reflected in neutrals. I will hold out speculation that seeing as how Boltons have the bulk of the units, and House Bolton is technically the house that neutrals are under. You can even kind of see it in their website design under houses. There's a Bolton house with the faction list under it.
Mhm.
Um, that maybe when we get to non-Bolton commanders, like when we start getting to Dario and stuff, we might see that mechanic be unique to that commander in this faction, like we saw with Davos being the only one in Baratheons with it. And that will redeem that design space from a flavor standpoint to me, because you really do need a motivation to take some of these odd man out sub factions with the neutrals. So I would hope that they bring that in that way. But I do agree that it is odd and a bit of a flavor fail in a way. But I understand lore wise why it's in Targaryens. But I just have a hard time not seeing it also in neutrals in some way.
Okay, we talked about the deck, talked about Ramsay. Now let's talk about the units that we have. And let's start off with the Flayed Men. And I'm gonna hop back on my excitement train because I have 2 units fully painted. I feel like they are the most badass looking models in the game. And I'm excited to finally have an excuse to possibly bring 2 of them in my army. All right, so we're looking at number 1, huge change. They've gone from 9 to 8 points. And then we have the attack profile of a 3+ to hit, 7 on full ranks, 5 at last rank, 3+ armor, 6 morale. That hasn't changed. The 5 movement hasn't changed either. But we have their keywords here: War Flail. They have Vicious, always, not just on the charge. And then when charging, it gains critical blow. So we're catching an essence of how they used to be just a little bit. And then their last effect is Intimidating Presence, which is something that we'll see in some of these other units and attachments. It says enemies engaged with this unit suffer -1 to morale tests and +1 wound from failing panic tests. I'm not so bothered by the loss in attack dice just because I see direct buffs with their other profiles.
Yeah, so I missed the age of Flayed Men dominated the meta. And having studied battle reports and things like that from it, I understand why they got changed. I think they're a great example of what happens when you double and triple tap a unit in nerfs without allowing the meta to settle after the first change. And I think they got overcorrected. Their big argument was they didn't want 2+ armor saves across all armies at the value they were, then changed the armor save. But then they also changed, the charge mechanics, and they also changed, X, Y, and Z. And I don't think that was needed at those times. If that was the design space they had a problem with, I think this is fine. I don't think there's people like, oh, they're an auto include again. And they're all right. They're good. They're good at 8 points. Especially when you look at the the Targaryen updates. Shout out to Three Sales Gaming, George. If y'all go to their YouTube panel, he's already got his hot take video up. As always, we'll do a more objective view after we've had a week to kind of chew on it. But um, George has got the hot off the presses, street talk going on those guys, and they're pretty crazy, as they should be. They're Dothraki. They're the all Cav faction, or sub faction. So I really like Intimidating Presence, but again, we're getting into that passive, more passive damage, more manipulating panic. This is basically old panic again, except oddly enough, not only are we back to old panic damage, we're also basically there a running corpse pile, right? Um, that's really big. This is really big here. Like, don't sleep on this, right? Because if you look at other units, we've seen some units lose morale because panic damage got toned down by 1, so they fail slightly more regularly, right? Roughly 16% or so. It's just like a 1
Yeah.
fluctuation. So, um, but this corrects for that. That punishes that even further, right? By bringing them back to old damage and then magnifying the fact they lost some morale. So this is going to be really relevant. They're going to be really good for neutrals, and I do think they're going to see play with factions that don't really have great heavy calf, especially depending on what we see the point costs. I think this unit really puts the pressure on the design space for Champs the Stag. At the moment, the design difference is when charging, gain critical blow, where Champs costed more but always had critical blow. So I'm really curious to see what they look like for Baratheons. Otherwise, you absolutely just replace them with Flayed Men. Some people already kind of did. Ray, Red Deepmouth, recently won World Cup North American Regionals with a unit
Okay,
of
first
Flayed Men.
off, his flayed men are they've got some kind of magical barrier around them. They they I think he'll even admit that they've single-handedly won him games before,
But they
and
just won't die.
yeah, they won't die. It's
Yeah,
amazing.
which is why they did need to have 2 armor save. So I agree with that design space, but um, yeah, but you know what I'm saying? Like they are going to threaten the value curve of other heavy cavalry, so they're going to have to be at least this good, and this is a pretty high bar.
Without going too far into the Targaryen visions that was released today, there are people that are upset that there are still units that have the capability of one-shotting. Their power levels are seemingly too strong when you compare it to what the designers have talked about and what their mission was for 1.7. But as a counter argument, I would say, when we're looking at the point costs of units in the 7 or 8 range, I think they should be elite. I think one thing that's not going to change is the power of activations. So there's still going to be reliance on your core 5 point units. And then when you sprinkle in, your Flayed Men, your Dothraki veterans, your Bachelor Girls, those are going to be the units that we lean on for those big plays. I still think that there should be a level of game changing units that are fun to field with, a handful of cool abilities.
I think people. So not to get too far into it. Go check out some videos. There's some articles coming out. I'm sure Chase is going to have a video tomorrow. Hopefully, Michael gives us some cool insight into it. I'm actually looking forward to that one because there's a couple of obvious questions Chase can ask that would really help the community out. And honestly, they've been doing a lot of things for the community lately. Michael and them have been throwing us a lot of bones, which I'll get into for my end of the episode shout out at the end there. But I'm fairly optimistic at the interactions right now. But I agree with you. Elite units need to exist. We were playing overly elite 5 point units for a long time, and that was actually what they probably meant by adjusting the power curve. Because so far, the 5 and 5-ish range seems to be getting throttled. We'll see that with cutthroats here in a little bit. But the Targaryen expose, the article, kind of shatters the baseline we were setting. Even me, who was challenging we're getting less killy, we're getting less control, the math didn't add up. I've said it a million times. The math don't add up, folks. When you look at the Targaryen article, I don't have to do the math for you. Like I tell Brett, he's asked me if I did the math. I said no. I rounded down, and I didn't even need to use the count on my toes. And I could tell you that veterans can one-shot a unit easily, because it's that many attacks. But it had good stats. So the problem with the Targaryen article is going to be the point value units. Their 6 point units are bonkers. Their 5 point unit they exposed or revealed is bonkers at 5 points. So they break the baseline. Now, anybody who watches Turning Grounds and Carl and them at stats is that in any pool of data, there's outliers. They could be the extreme. So what this tells us is that while it's been speculation season and it's been really fun, we need to kind of corral ourselves in now and really start looking at these cards as a pool. We can now see the landscape and the design space and compare 2021 to 2021. And that's what you said, what you get into. We haven't seen anything in the rulebook, the game modes, or almost 3 full faction reveals that show us activations are not as powerful. But we do see point cost changes that more or less bring most factions down about 1 activation on average. And we do see a shift in where the output comes from. There's a more subtle gradient in where the control comes from. It's the same amount of control you're going to play into every day in every game. However, the choices to get to that threshold of control are now a little more varied. There's now a little bit of control in more commander kits. So it's not always the same control commander. Maybe it's one of three. Same thing in damage units. Instead of being one go-to damage unit, now it's two or three. You at least have flavor in how you play the average game. The average game will still play the same, but the flavor will change because you have a little bit more of a custom setting to how you get to that point. It's not just this is the only way to eight activations. This is the only way to either enough control and attrition or enough damage. Now there's some gray area there, and I think that's going to be really fun for us to explore. So go into it with an open mind, adjust your baselines, and experiment for a little bit. We're going to at least get 6 months to a year of legit experimentation again, and I'm with Lord Commander Bob on that. That's probably the hypest part of all of this, is that we get to start over and just jam games and be really bad at making lists for a couple weeks and then dial it in, right? And then the dialing in gets cool, and the first person to solve certain things is going to be running the show for like 9 minutes because we're all on the internet together and we all talk too much. Myself being the king talk too much, but it'll it'll get around pretty quick. But it'll be a good time and we'll be playing games, and that's what's dope.
All right, speaking of hype, we're going to move on to the next unit here. So when I mentioned that the Bolt and Flayed Men were my favorite models in the game, the close second is the Bolton Bachelor Girls. Even though the Flayed Men are my favorite looking, I feel like the Bachelor Girls are my favorite unit in the game. Not only do they look great, but I feel like their abilities, it works so well together. Thematically, what they did, it seems like a lot of thought was put into the original design of this, and I absolutely see what Chanel was going for when he came out with this. So the 1.7 version, they've got +1 movement, so now they're at a 6. They get an extra dice at last rank in their melee attack, which is an understated buff. And then Tracker's Bow saw a change, so instead of defender rolling ones, they become vulnerable. It's just a constant effect. You get hit with this, you become vulnerable. I'm not going to complain just because I love this unit. But again, as an objective outlier, Charles, how do you see this affecting list building and playing against this unit?
Uh, this unit is on my list of concerns units. They've always been. Bastard Girls were already the best unit in Stannis side, because Faithful had so little to really work with. Now, Stannis side is going to have to be even stronger to not lean on Bastard Girls even harder because they are buffed in every way. They're buffed in every way that you wanted them to be in Stannis. They're a huge power curve at 7 points. And they were already splashed in a lot of other factions who wanted to kind of be a combined arms ranged into punch, melee punch. The speed increase is huge. Not every meta relies on them as much as others, the global meta, but Bastard Girls have a very high win rate in a lot of factions, and they are another unit similar to Flayed Men, because that's the problem with neutrals. We have to remember that when we grind about neutrals, we're not trying to hype on neutrals players, and we said a long time that there's a neutrals tax that neutrals players get. Their units always get nerfed and throttled because they push out other units and other factions because you can just take them. Which is why I always suggested that there should be alternative versions or alternative costs for a dedicated neutral army, to where you can literally just mark them up a point or two and make it harder to splash them aggressively in other factions, but keep them at where they needed to be, exactly balanced to what you want them to be in neutrals. This is another unit that's going to threaten to push out a lot of things in a lot of factions. Um, they mainly did it in Baratheons because they didn't have a lot of releases. They didn't even necessarily fit in Night's Watch, but people still played them from time to time because they were that good. But people in Night's Watch are even now legitimately talking about running Bastard Girls because of how much better they got, right? Like, they are better at 7 points than other Ranger Hunter type units that were 8 points and did similar things. You know what I'm saying? Like they're better than Chronogman in some ways. You know, that stuff really means something when you're talking about units that were already kind of up on the power curve. Um, that's the real concern I have with this unit. I am very happy for all you guys who play neutrals. You got some cool units coming, and this is for you. But from a health standpoint of the game, I'm a little worried. But seeing Targaryens, a lot of butts today. I'm in a butt mood. The Targaryen spoiler also shows you that like I'm not taking these guys over for one more point. I can get veterans. Like I'm just gonna make room for it, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, but when you're looking at like Kingsmen for 7 points or Stags for 8, right? And Baratheons, um, is it worth it when I can get Bachelor Girls for 7? Just
Right.
blow some clean off the table and not care. Um, you know, because like where your boy was it Max? I think it is likes to talk about his tactical nuke Baratheons with Bennett. His tactical approach still wrecks shop when you charge in with Bastard Girls. You don't have to just shoot and use it. So even though it's on melee only, these Bastard Girls for 7 points still delete stuff with tactical approach.
Yeah, it's going to be scary for sure.
So like, I'm a little worried about this unit. Really good, happy for you guys. Really buffed, really solid unit. Threatening design space.
Moving on to the Bolton Blackguards, another unit that got massively buffed. Same movement at a 4, but we see their attack profile change. So they lose a dice at full rank. So they're hitting on 4s and it's 654. But now they receive something that I felt like they should have always had, which is Vicious. And then the new Horrific Visage. Each time an enemy performs a melee attack on this unit, before resolving that attack, target the attacker. They suffer 1 panic test with a -1 to their roll for each remaining rank in this unit. So you attack this unit when it's untouched, that's a -3 panic test. Pretty damn good, I would think. The 1.6 version was a little tough for me to field because when you have the strength of cutthroats and their pure offensive gas, you know, it was easier just to focus on that game plan and save points because blackguards are 6 and cutthroats are 5. So you could just spam cutthroats and just go full force on attacking. If you wanted to play the game mode, sit on objectives, sure, blackguards were your defensive unit, but the 4 movement always hindered them, and then they just seemed to melt. Attack them in the flank, shoot them with range units. You know, they just weren't that scary. You can dance around them. Now, I do like how they have Vicious now, so they can still push damage in on the charger when attacking in melee. So, what are your thoughts on this new unit of Blackguards?
They're really good. Vicious was a no-brainer. The change in the attack profile is in line with the baseline people expected for 6-point units. As I mentioned, that's kind of got adjusted this week. But Horrific Visage is strictly buffed, and it's pretty crazy, in my opinion, in scale, how it scales. And I can easily see this unit actually getting an attachment now. I think at that stat line, 3-6, 3-6 is a little above average on panic, right? You pass a little more than 50% of the time. That I can see them getting the new, actually using their attachment, which is the Dreadfort Captain, the man Chanel himself, because of the way the game modes interact now. So things to keep in mind here is that you already have game modes that you lose a token when you fail a panic or morale test, so they can get it. If they hold it, right? If they have it and somebody hits them and they lose it, well, to even attack them to get it, they might fail a panic test. But they also have vicious on the crackback, so they have a more chance of failing it. And if they're the Dreadfort Captain, if you fail a panic check, the unit heals 2. So they can keep their ranks up as well. They have that sustain at 7 points. So this unit can actually be a pretty solid objective holder. I do think you're going to see more Bolton Blackguards in lists for certain built for certain game modes. I think you're actually going to see them that way in more than one faction because not every faction has a good objective holder at a good like price point. I think this is a really good objective holder exchanger for like your Game of Thrones type game modes, the X point nodes, things like Hound and Ready, things like that. I think they're very strong for, and I can see that. I think they're gonna be seed play. They're not gonna be like an auto include, but like they could easily be in 50% of lists.
Yeah, I agree.
Easily in neutrals, and probably as high as 30% of lists or more in other factions.
It's just the price point. That 1 point really is a difference between 5 and 6.
Yeah, horrific visage and vicious for 6 points is a deal in most armies who have like the next closest thing to a good objective holder of 7 points. You'll just take these guys.
Okay, last unit here. We have the Cutthroats, and we went over 3 units that got obvious direct buffs, and then we see Cutthroats went. They got nerfed. And I understand what they were going for here. The power level of some 5-point units and 1.6 were just too strong for the point cost. The new Cutthroats still moving at a 5, but we see their attack profile taking a direct hit. We're seeing them hit on a 4+ now, and they lose a die at full rank. So 4+ at a 7, 6, 4. They still have vicious. That's good. The other part of ruthless aggression here is the unit may reroll attack dice when attacking enemies that have not activated this round. So rather than dishing out the vulnerable token, you can now reroll. I don't really see that as a buff. I mean, maybe it's just like it's just a change, not a buff, not a nerf. You're not really focusing your game plan on what your Cutthroats are going to do in the early rounds. I mean, it's sad to see a nerf to a staple unit in my favorite faction, but again, I understand what they were going for here. They want to tone down some of these 5-point units.
You'll still take them in some matchups. They'll be list specific now, which is a little bit of a bummer because you do see the few 5-point units we have seen have been pretty pushed, in my opinion. Lannister Guardsman, you now have Hrothgar for Targaryens. These guys are actually kind of low on that curve. Though I do agree with you that the May reroll attack dice on unactivated versus the vulnerable is a side grade because, as we mentioned, the terrain situation. But also, you see things like Howland attachment, Jamie commander attachment, mummers themselves. Minus to hit is getting more common. Like there wasn't a lot of minus to hit debuffs in 1.6. There's now a good bit of it, right? That we just know because some of it's neutral. So it could be around. So rerolling to hit when your charges don't really work. This is not an order, so it gets around the disorderly. I mean, it's not a card, so it gets around the disorderly because orders don't have to deal with it anyway. But so that's not as bad. The getting from a 3 to a 4, there shouldn't be 3+5 cav, right? Not base. There should not be base 3+ 5-point infantry. There shouldn't on the hits.
Right. Right.
Like Raiders could get to it with gang up. 2 units in combat is actually quite difficult to get done most of the time. So like it's okay if something can get to 3+ easily enough. If it takes a tactics card or an NCU attach influence or even an attachment, I'm okay with it. I don't think a 5-point unit base should have a 3+ to hit. So I think this is a healthy change. But I do think you better hope Stormcrow Mercs are at least solidly statted like this, kind of a vanilla infantry stat line, because neutrals are going to be sad if both their 5 points are subpar. But I do think you'll take these guys, like we mentioned in some game modes, where this vicious really matters, where you really just want dudes to lose tokens. I think that's going to matter. So you'll see them in some lists, but I do think for the most part, if Stormcrow Mercs are even decent at 5 points and stuff adaptable, you'll actually see these guys replaced most of the time with Stormcrows because of the attachments, and then you'll see a Blackguard unit instead.
Yeah, and I think we'll start seeing different approaches in list building. I don't know if there's a lot of people out there that are like me, where in 1.6, Cutthroats were my baseline. I started with them, and then I would build the list from there. where now we're seeing the buffs to Flayed Men and Bachelor Girls, and maybe I'm gonna start with my Flayed Men and then filling out the points from there. I guess we'll see. And a lot has to do with the attachments that are available, and we'll get into those right now. Well, first, let's back up a little bit. Before we get into the attachments, we have the actual Ramsay commander. So let's talk about that. Of course, given the affiliation, House Bolton. And then he gives whatever unit he's in horrific visage. Obviously, don't put him in blackguards. Don't be dumb. But looking at this card, I'm like, dervishes? Yeah, I could see him in a unit like that. What do you think?
I think I'd rather see him in dervishes than see him in mummers. Him in mummers terrifies me right now.
Ooh, yeah.
Because Counter Strike. So you come in on the attack, you hit him, you get hit with visage, you fail. You don't go down to full rank anymore. Okay, great. But you're already down possibly 3 wounds. Then you come in there and you whiff a series of attacks. You take another 3, 4 hits. You go out. You're down a rank and a half before you even get there. You know what I'm saying? On a unit
Right.
that you probably barely did any damage to, and now they're a Bolton unit, so they count for cards. Like, it's gonna be annoying. It might not be busted, but it's gonna be annoying as all hell.
Okay, moving on to the attachment version of Ramsay. We have Fueled by Slaughter. So after this unit completes a melee attack, if the defender suffered any wounds, this unit restores 1 wound plus 1 additional wound for each of the defender's destroyed ranks. And then it also has Intimidating Presence, which we also saw in the Flayed Men. So enemies engaged with this unit suffer -1 to morale test rolls and +1 wound from failing panic tests. So he's essentially breaking the rules of 1.7 and giving them the old panic rules from 1.6. And it's also like a half vicious. So interesting that they sort of gave him the flavor of the old Roos attachment, where if a enemy engaged with it failed the panic test, they could restore wounds. A little variation on that. At 2 points, I don't know. I don't know if I would run it. I've never been a big attachment heavy player. I always went for the value of NCUs and the value of just raw units. But 1.7 may change that. What do you think about this attachment version? Stovetop says mildly vicious. He gets the
Yeah,
mildly vicious keyword.
yeah. So like looking at this right, and then like looking at the Dreadfort Captain, which is next. So I'm gonna kind of go ahead and we're gonna compare the two. You got 1 point for a Dreadfort Captain, which has Prey on Fear, which hasn't really changed. Each time an enemy engaged with this unit fails a panic test, this unit restores 2 wounds. That is better than Fueled by Slaughter. Um, on average, on your average attacks, like sustained fights. So if you're looking at a unit that's gonna grind things out, um, like the Blackguards, you're going Dreadfort Captain, which is good because that's their attachment. Um, I don't know where I want Ramsay. I actually think Ramsay could be worth 2 points in another faction. With a vicious unit that needs some sustain because the faction can't get much sustain. Who that is, don't know. I don't know. But it's interesting. I do think it's interesting. It could matter more when we see other commander cards. Like if we see Roos's cards and they change, because he only had 1 new card and 2 cards of the same name of his old cards. So we'll see. Let's say that they got reworked, but the Bolton affiliation could matter. But at the moment, even in an adaptive unit, him at 1 point on the unit, making it a 6 point unit if it's like Mercs, probably not worth. Probably not worth because he doesn't actually increase the likelihood they do the wound, right? To get the healing. The closest thing I think he'd be good in, just raw good and core neutrals that we've seen so far, is Bastard Girls. And I don't think I want 9 point Bastard Girls, but he is good in
Right.
Bastard Girls. You will just straight up like heal a unit of Bastard Girls up because when you kill the unit, you'll just gain 4 wounds back, right? You'll heal a rank. Um, you'll get the extra. They're already vicious, and they'll get the extra panic damage. So like, you'll see some fun lists. I think it'll be fun, thematic lists with him and Bastard Girls, but I don't think it'll be a tournament unit. I don't think it'll be a 9 point tournament unit.
Yeah, and with the tactics deck no longer relying on the bags, it seems like the designers sort of wanted to give more healing across the neutral faction or with these Bolton units. But you're right, they would seem very enticing to put in Bachelor Girls, but then we're looking at a 9-point unit. I don't know. It will take some experimenting. These could be healing could be clutch in this faction, especially with the opponent failing panic tests. It's probably going to be a guarantee when you have a lot of units with vicious, and then you're adding on top of that the panic tokens that are being dished out by Roos or the tactics cards that Ramsay has. Yeah, I'm excited to try it out. You did jump ahead a little bit with Dreadfort Captain. We'll go ahead and just talk about these next two attachments together. So we had Dreadfort Captain and Bolton Flayer, essentially swapping
Yeah.
abilities, which I think makes sense. Unless in 1.6, if you imagine the Bolton Flayer eating the skin and healing from that, I guess that made sense, but it just depends on how you look at it. So the Dreadfort Captain in 1.7 is they have Prey on Fear. So they restore 2 wounds if an enemy engaged with them fails the panic test. At one point, yeah, sure. Bolton Flayer. This is a little different. Spread Fear says when an enemy engaged with this unit fails a panic test, target one other enemy in long range of this unit. It suffers 1 panic test with a -1 to the roll for each remaining rank in this unit. On a failure, it suffers +1 wound. So less of eating people and healing. Now they're
It's like you make a skin banner and you just kind of wave it at people. Like, you're next! You're next!
right. Yeah, okay, spread fear. That makes sense. I like that.
You just like throw a layer at them and just like hits them in the face.
So, I mean, we're seeing 2 1-point attachments here. I feel like they are very fitting for their point costs. Again, in 1.7, we're going to need to see more of a reason to start taking attachments rather than spending points elsewhere. I do think that they are very synergistic with the units that have been spoiled and the tactics deck, Ramsay's in particular. So, I mean, I can see myself experimenting with them.
So it's going to come down to how durable your units are with the Bolton Flayer. How many ranks you got? Increasing, because it's basically a Lannister guardsman, which we all keep talking about how strong they are, which is really good. While enemy in long range of that unit suffers 1 panic test with a -1 to their roll. Future main rank in this unit. On a failure, they suffer 1 wound. So the wounds don't scale like Lannister Supremacy, but the check does, which is really cool. As much as I hate to say it, I think you consider playing this if you have a random point lying around in Lannisters in Guardsmen.
Right.
Because if you
Right.
get charged and you crack back with your Lannister Supremacy and they fail, you then can trigger this and do a pretty much a Lannister Supremacy, the current Lannister Supremacy, but still better because of the ranks, on another unit in long range, and you double down on the order on 1 attack. For 6 points, that's pretty rough. Considering they're a 3 armor save. So it's pretty interesting. But I do think it's cool. They didn't see much play much before at all. I think it's solid. I also think you kind of possibly see something like Dreadfort Captain at a random roundup point and something like Lannister Guardsman again also, because they're like, all right, you're going to probably fail this panic check because I'm hitting you at a -2 or a -3 with more wounds. And if they heal it back, then the Lannister Guardsmen stay at 3 ranks longer. So, like, both of these can see play on Lannisters, in my opinion, because the way the new Guardsman works. So, that's already 2 more attachments, 2 of these attachments in play than you normally see. So, I think it's solid changes.
And then the very last attachment we'll talk about is Theon Greyjoy, the skinny boy himself. So he has order set an example, start of any turn, target all enemies in short range. They become panicked, roll a die on a 6, you kill Theon. So now we see that Ramsay can now just be 2 points and Theon is completely optional, which I like. I like that a lot. Of course, Theon, if you bring him, it has to be in a unit with Ramsay. But the second thing is instead of choosing a unit within long range upon the unit's activation, making them panicked, it is now start of any turn, and you target all enemies within short range. My biggest takeaway is now it's roll of a 6 where he dies, because every game that I play with this guy, he survives one round. He never makes it to the end of the game. I think having that roll of a 6 is pretty big for players that have bad luck like me. And I think it's a pretty powerful effect in the mid to late game when you could be surrounded by 2 or 3 units and you need those panics out there. Very synergistic with the former attachments that we just talked about with the Bolton Flater and the Jet 4 Captain. I like it mainly because Ramsay now can be a 2-point attachment. That in itself, I think, is cool. What do you think about his change?
I'm glad he got changed to a 6 because I can agree with you that in the half a dozen or so games I've played into a Ramsay list or played Ramsay myself, he also never lived past the first use. And it's a running joke in the community in general because I've only met 1 or 2 people who legend has it have seen him pass the first check. He pretty much always dies on the first go round. But do I think you spend a point on him? No, probably never, honestly. So here's the thing. We talked about the same thing with Weeper. The new Weeper attachment costs 2 points. It has the same thing on a different mechanic, a different keyword. Actually, I think it is set an example as well, actually. But and it just instead of Weeper dying, I kill an infantry unit, right? Which is arguably better because I can still do it more often. The reality is you're still mostly only going to catch 1, maybe 2 units throughout the course of the game in your short range bubble. And as you mentioned, if later in the game you're stuck in and you have 3 units within short range, you're probably about to get blown up because you're going to get hit by 3 units unless you have a really grindy list. So it's possible because he's in neutrals and not free folk that he can be in the scrum well enough to be scrapping and get more than 1 unit. So it's going to really be list dependent, I think, if you try to make room for him. And the problem is to get him, you still need either A, Ramsay Commander, or B, a 2-point attachment to go with him. So he's effectively limited to 1 commander or 3 points. It's a flexible start of any turn. I think the mechanic is fine. I just don't know if I'd ever pay for it. Like you said, points are already a premium, especially when you're trying to fit in things like Bachelor Girls and Flayed Men. It's going to be a really attrition-heavy list where I think I got a real frontliner that I can put him in to get him in the middle of the board and make it a real bubble. Because the problem with Weeper and Free Folk, he even gives a unit vicious, still don't care for 2 points. Because I haven't seen any units yet. Hopefully we have some. None will live long enough in the position on the board they need to be to really get work out of this order. But if you can get him in a defensive enough unit, you might get work out of his order. It's going to really be less dependent.
One thing that I failed to see, and this should have been obvious from the start, I'm looking at Ramsay sadist attachment when, it's just 1 point to field him with your commander, especially with Horrific Visage. That can be pretty clutch when you're staring at a unit that's about to charge, start of any turn. Make that unit panicked, roll your dice. Hopefully he doesn't die. But with the commander, I definitely think that he's worth the 1 point.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. It's going to depend on how your list is trying to play and what you're trying to leverage. It's going to be very list dependent. I agree with you on that. And with Commander, I could definitely see you getting some solid turns out of him.
Let's just wrap up our overview. I'm excited. I'm also biased, mainly because personally, I want to stay positive with what's coming in 1.7. There's nothing wrong with being cautious, but how do you think this relates to the grand scheme from what we've seen so far? Does this shift your thoughts on where the game is heading? We've had a handful of these decks and units and attachments spoiled. So what are your overall thoughts?
I think it's more like I mentioned earlier, where people need to adjust their baseline. I think the illusion that, not the illusion. I think the developers sort of misspoke by using some fairly definitive terms in their earlier visions and articles, saying that things like control were going to be toned down, damage output was going to be toned down. Free actions were going to cost something. Most cases, they're costing the card. So I think people can now, not even just objectively, literally look at a couple of decks, a couple of cards. When we said things about the Greyjoy deck, well, now we can compare them and we can be like, okay, we're being pretty honest here. They have a lot of stipulations that don't really make sense compared to these other tactics decks. Baratheons lost a lot of legit output. They gained some consistency, but they lost a lot of output compared to things like neutrals. And similarly with we're toning units down and killiness is going down. It's not here. That's not what this says at all. So does it curve my outlook? Not particularly. So it is what it is. My overall grade for this Visions in particular is an A minus. I give it an A for the units, even though I'm scared, fearful that they're going to push some things out of the design space. Bachelor Girls, Flayed Men. We now have a baseline because they're neutrals and they can go in other factions, or the other factions can have that we'll see play. That line of thinking only applies to neutrals because of the neutrals mechanic. So that's what's dangerous about it. But I give it an A minus because I give the tactics deck a B plus, and an A for the units. So I'm giving it about an A minus overall because I don't think the tactics deck's great. I think it's good. I think it's gonna be fun to play. I think it's gonna do some interesting things, especially if the commander cards get more interesting. But at the moment, the commander cards aren't that interesting. It's just Ramsay, and his cards aren't great. But I do think the units themselves are solid. They're good units, and that's kind of the concern, right? They're really good units in some cases.
Okay, I think we've talked long enough. Let's just go ahead and move on to our weekly shout outs. Charles, I'll start with you.
All right, my weekly shout out is to whoever is Michael Chanel's handler. All right, hear me out. It's a very abstract shout out. He's got a boss. We give him a lot of guff, but he's got a boss, right? Somebody tells him what he can and can't publish and say. He doesn't own the company, doesn't own the game. They have allowed him to release more than they've already described when they talked about these visions for the faction deep dives. They mentioned in the very first Baratheons deep dive that we shouldn't expect full tactics decks, but they felt like they had to show a full tactics deck and a little bit of units and stuff to commander to talk about them because of the design space and how much they had to change it because of the two sub factions. And then they've now followed up with two more complete faction decks, including a commander and several units. So for those of us who hold a grudge about the lack of recognition for online play from CMON, which a lot of us accept that there's a business reason why, his handler has clearly denied, if you want to deny it, clearly someone somewhere has decided to throw us a bone in the online community. And I have to give credit where credit is due there because we've gotten full tactics decks and additional units and commanders. And we are now playing fully 2021 lists and games in real life by printing them out and in TTS. So for those of us who like to hold a grudge and demand more from who we purchase from, it's very important to point out that they are giving us what we asked for. And I couldn't be more grateful for it.
Now, my shout outs, I got a few this week, one of which goes out to my boy Ray, otherwise known as R Deep Math, and his buddy Claw for both qualifying in the NA World Cup Finals. Ray, especially winning the NA regional with Baratheons, totally proving Carlo wrong. It was a huge feat. He beat you, Weasel,
Yep.
which I think was I didn't think it was going to happen. Baratheons and the Free Folk is a very tough matchup. He went on to beat Starks he beat Dragons, and Shark said he played in the finals.
Yep.
Yeah, he played Bob, of course. Yeah, so he beat. Yeah, I mean, he beat the odds basically. So shout out to him. Shout out to Claw, who also brought a faction that wasn't expected to do so well, which is nice watch. So very good job to you guys. Another shout out quickly to Tim, who lent me his Lannister army that I could use in the battle report that I filmed today. So you guys stay tuned for the next episode. It's going to be Clegane Bowl. It was the Mountain versus the High Sparrow. Technically, it was supposed to be the Mountain versus the Hound, but it was a High Sparrow list. Very cool match. I recorded with Jeff from Shield Wall Gaming. Really awesome dude. Awesome opponent. Stay tuned for that. It's coming out soon. And then, of course, like always, I'm thanking my patrons. Your support allows me to record this podcast, continue to make quality battle reports. So thank you to you guys. And with that, we're going to close out the show, and we are out.